All right, everyone, welcome to the Robert Show. Super excited today because I have been waiting for this roundtable since a while, and we are back with Enterprise series. I'm also excited because we are talking about what's hot today. We all have been hearing about Agentic AI moving from concept to production, so we're going to be talking a lot about that data architecture. Trust, context, a lot of those things. But without any further ado, let me just bring up all the guests today. Starting with my co-host Mona Rakibe. Mona, welcome to the Ravit Show. Again, super excited to co-host this with you. Mona Rakibe is CEO and co-founder at Helmai, building trusted data foundations for AI. Mona will bring up more guests and then we'll discuss about different topics that I'm pretty sure the audience is excited about as well. Let me bring up our first guest, Alex, with a green screen. Alex is the head of developer relations at Dremio and co-author of Apache Iceberg, the definitive guide. Alex, welcome to the Robert Show. I see a
Yes.
green screen in front
Oh,
of me.
got it. That's
for
weird.
some
I see the background, like the house background on my end. But yeah, no, I'm very excited to be on the show. Always love talking to you, Ravit, and I very look forward to sitting there and having a discussion with all of you about the data lakehouse and all the really cool things that are going on in the industry right now.
Fantastic. Alex, by the time you fix your screen, I'm also going to bring up the other guest, Scott Hines from BRAF. Scott, not a new face to the Ravit Show. We've spoken earlier this year, and you obviously started as a head of developer relations at BUFF. So super excited to chat with you, and you're also the co-author of Delta Lake, the definitive guide. Good to have you back on the show.
Oh, thanks so much. It's good to be back as well. And it's also good to be back with like yet another awesome person within like the Lakehouse community as well. So I'm really happy to be sharing the screen with Alex today as well. And Mona, good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Scott. Should we figure out Alex's situation? He seems to be
Yes.
on,
on the green screen.
Yeah,
so you want to switch off your camera or log back in and
yeah.
All right, Alex, your screen was back, but it's gone again. So
I've seen this issue before. Wait,
no.
Yeah, just using Google.
I think it works.
Okay.
Cool.
We are good. Let's go.
Okay.
All right. So starting with the market shift to agentic AI, I'm kind of curious to learn from all of you here. Everyone says they are agentic AI ready. In your work, what does that actually mean, and what does it not mean? I'm kind of curious to know a little bit about that. Maybe Scott, you can go first.
Yeah. So I think things have shifted a little bit for me. So like now that I'm at Buff, like we're more of like an API company, connecting the dots with Pro to Buff. But for a lot of like our customers who are using like agentic AI like on like a daily basis, like it's part of like their bread and butter nowadays.
Right.
I think that the big shift is essentially just giving up control in a lot of cases, right? I think it's still kind of like this whole like the difference between agents and what we have like for APIs isn't too different. Like the way that we're now kind of I'm like threading things together is really like the only difference, right? And so I think a lot of that really is that it's giving up a little bit of control, having the right guardrails in place, and then ensuring that things are tested.
Yeah, very interesting. Alex, what do you see? How do you see, when everyone says we are agentic AI ready, what do you think about that?
To me, I mean, at the end of the day, like when I hear agentic AI ready data, it just means ready data, as getting ready data ready has always been. Because at the end of the day, like all agentic AI is doing, and all AI is doing in general, is understanding your data in a way that an individual would, just doing it a lot faster and doing it with a lot more context. But in that case, having all that data prepared becomes extra important, because it's going to either will extra quickly get to the right answer or extra quickly get to the wrong answer if you've prepared your data correctly, which means data quality, which means semantic definitions, which means data cleanliness, all the things that were always important, except now the use of that data is accelerated. So the good and bad that comes of not doing those things has accelerated. But all it just means is just having good data ready to go, so that way an AI can, or your agents can just kind of do their magic and do those workflows. But what is the best practice? What is it that you're supposed to do is the same. It's just now much more important.
Yeah, I feel that is so important and such great point that you made around data quality, context, and also the trust. Mona, in your work, I'm pretty sure you talk to a lot of customers at Telmy, and you all work a lot on the data quality aspect too. So, kind of curious to learn a little about that, and also wanting to know how are you seeing Agentic AI ready, and when do you see customers actually say that and they really mean it?
I have a lot of perspectives, so keep me honest on the time. I might go on for an hour, but let me tell you, first thing for us was like a big mental shift, right? Whatever we knew for Telmy, how we built
Mm-hmm.
Telmy 4 years back, was almost like questioned when we started rethinking of agents. And specifically, I'm talking about agentic workflows. And the difference in agentic workflows is now we have to think that our customers are thinking that they are building models. Models have become so smart. And drawing the analogy with human brains, like you have compute, like you have processing power, you have memory, but now you have the most special part of human brain, which is executive function, where you are able to reason and take decisions and plan and break down tasks. And so, how do we get ready for this fully autonomous world? When we designed Telmy, this was not in our mind first time, right? So how do we shift that thinking? So it started with first changing the mental model of the entire company, like starting with the founders. Like our customers are going to want this. They're going to operate in a world where agents are making decisions that may not even be a
Right.
human in the loop. And so, how do we prepare for that transition and help them transition better? So, when you think about that, it really came down for us with three things, right? Like models are smart, query engines are going to work with different tools. So, that's the given truth. All the models are getting smarter and smarter. Context is going to be so much important, low latency
Mm-hmm.
context. And how do we make sure that this context is available? And also processing all type of data, right? The one thing that has got unlocked in this world is unstructured data has become like so important now. Like
Right.
everybody's talking, it's no longer like, hey, unstructured data is a different pipeline. So there's a lot of shifting of mental model followed by technology change, followed by our product roadmap change. So it's almost like I feel like we had to reinvent ourselves and take a hard
Mm-hmm.
pause and look at things differently. So I know that Scott and Alex, you said that fundamentally the use cases are similar, the model is similar, but it is a big mental shift that now we are preparing for a world where there is everything is autonomous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say this real
Um,
quick. Is it if it's cool, or Robert, if you
yeah,
want to go?
please go.
Okay,
No, go ahead.
cool,
Go ahead, please.
cool.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right. I was thinking a little bit more about like what Alex was saying as well, and it's interesting because like there's this whole catalyst of all the things that people never wanted to do, like all the things that you need for like truly governed data, like all the actual semantic metadata that should be there to ensure that we know which table to pick, what's verified, what's
Yep.
not verified, what is like
Mhm.
certified for use by agentic systems, things like that. Like that's been essentially missing, or it's always been like, oh, we'll do that later, right? I'm doing like the air quotes because it's always like the last thing people want to do, right? It used to be like the governance aspect of things, but now that's actually like the metadata that is powering systems, because without a human in the loop, there's no way to actually connect the dots. And I just think
Yep.
that's interesting because it's like you put off enough things long enough that people will eventually, connect those dots for you. And so I think in a lot of companies now, that's what's happening. So they're all just, everything's kind of coming back together again, which is neat.
Yeah, it just feels more real. I'm also wanting to know a little bit from your experience in the last 12 months. What has changed that made this shift feel much more real? Is it like the use cases that have been we've been kind of seeing, or is it more on the lines where, or it's just because there's more adaptation that has happened now this has become a thing? Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I think two things have really sort of made the prospect of agentic AI much more practical. One is MCP. I mean, just MCP's just made it much easier
Mm-hmm.
to build replicable modular pieces of agentic logic. So basically now, instead of me rebuilding the same wheel over and over again for every different interface, I can have multiple interfaces on the same pieces over and over again, which is really changes the way you build AI or agentic workflows and how you can think about that. The second thing is just the improvement of the models. The models can have larger context windows. They give you better results. So when I'm getting better results from those AI prompts, and then having a much easier way to build those sort of agentic tools and prompt templates on top of that, it really makes it where like, hey, this is now actually doing stuff that is increasing my productivity versus, hinting at the potential of that.
Yeah, very interesting. Mona, what do you think about it?
I think I
Like, what
agree
has
with
changed?
Alex. The quality of foundational models continues to improve, and the stuff that we can get done in a much more accurate manner has significantly changed, right? So the results are really good. So definitely MCP is helping. It's almost like so quickly become a standard for operation, like almost like feels like
Yep.
it's now like REST, right? Like
Mhm.
you have to make sure everything is accessible by the agent in a standardized format. So 100% agree with Alex here. So yeah.
Nice. Scott, what are your thoughts? How have you seen this shift happening in the last 12 months?
I mean, again, like I'm gonna agree with the crowd, right? But it's a lot of the tooling's just gotten easier to use, right? And if you think about like, I think it was like the first time I actually did anything with any kind of agentic anything, it's like last December, and I think that was like Claude 3.5, right? And so like by the time I get to Claude 4, it's like do my work for me, and if MCPs are available, now also call out to my own systems. And I think it's been interesting to be able to see that, because before, there was these promises of AI being able to really transform like an engineering workflow, or really insert any type of automation. And it's like, oh, this, there's like that promise of being able to facilitate something that we can't do as well as humans who are synchronously communicating, right? And you think about this now, like with like any kind of like logistics or anything else that would benefit from having robotic eyes and ears and other things like that in the loop. It's just kind of interesting, like where we're kind of going and how quickly we're getting there. So I think like it's about almost the year anniversary of MCP, right? And so it's
Yep.
like how drastically have we shifted everything in less than a year? It's nuts. So
Yeah, it is. I have a question for the audience, and I'll start with my perspective a little bit. So, I have seen some of our customers make architectural changes, right? Specifically, some of them are re architecting things to make sure that they are able to build autonomous agent as products at a very fast pace. And both of you are like the experts on like lakehouse architecture. Are you seeing a shift in architecture and in general how people are scaling their AI and agentic workflows?
Alex, do you want to go first?
Sure. Basically, I mean, working at Dremio, sort of usually where the conversations I'm having with people is more like on data unification and things like this. So in this case, it does that I've seen sort of that becomes more important, has become more important, mainly because when you're building all these agentic AI applications, what happens if I don't unify my data in a sense? What happens? I have my Postgres credentials in there. I got my Snowflake credentials in there. I got my Databricks credentials in there. I have all these credentials that I'm now managing in my code. And that becomes really difficult to juggle. And then there's also sort of performance bottlenecks. So having some sort of like thinking about sort of how I can streamline connection through a variety of data has been sort of one way that I've seen some people architectural. Also, again, just like thinking, and then also just making sure that data is like, once you get to that funnel, how do I make sure that the data is well prepared? And that comes back to like the modeling, data cleanliness, data, all these things, because basically now it's sort of thinking through sort of, I have my data. There's the whole data lakehouse piece where you're kind of standardizing your data on a format that works for a good chunk of your data, but there's still gonna be data you buy from like different marketplaces or you share from partners, whatnot. So thus you need some level of federation. But before you hit that funnel, there's all this data quality and data prep stuff that people are starting to think more seriously about. So it's sort of thinking through those sort of three pieces to make sure that those applications at the end are manageable and scalable.
I see. So just to kind of reiterate, Alex, you're saying you're seeing more focus on unification and also data quality at that lake, because now it's important for the applications to have validated data access right at the lake.
Exactly. You need good data for the agentic workflows to work, but you need a good funnel to make sure that your code doesn't get too complicated and you don't have security issues within the code of exposing too many credentials.
Yep. I also think that there's a lot more kind of, well, I was bringing it up a little bit before as well, but there's a lot more kind of focus on, actual priority on, semantic naming conventions, things like that too, right? Where it's like, where I used to work before Buff was Nike, and it's like we have a red shoe, but a red at Nike might mean 450 different types of red. And so if you want to be able to say like, show me all red shoes, and then, rank them by some sort of, probability of, purchase rate for a specific customer, then, you have to distill that down to, actual, like an identifier, right? It's like an enumeration of red. And, this is stuff that's kind of usually people are like, oh, like, let's not ever think about that. We'll fix that later. And I think there's a lot more kind of now stress to get that stuff done now so that people can catch up, right? It's like the whole, like, it's the FOMO, right? It's like, I want this now. Everyone else is winning with this. How do we do that, right? And I think that that's something that we're going to continue to see as well, where it's, again, kind of going back to like, governance like 101, right? It's, what's the semantic entities that I have? Who has access to them? So talking about like what Alex was bringing up as well, like, if an agent has, root access and has kind of like a God mode over your entire system, is that a good or a bad thing? That's a scary thing. And so, that in itself, I think is going to be, that's going to be a tipping point, right? Where, we start to see, larger kind of outages and things like that when things go wrong, right? It's going to be those horror stories that, might come up. But that's like a Debbie Downer, like that's like an unoptimistic perspective. I think in a more kind of optimistic like perspective, like having everything, almost like, graph relational is something that I think we're going to see a lot more of. So, can we reduce, the number of nodes to make it easier for an agent to communicate, right, with the different systems that we're going to connect, right? Because, if you have one MCP today, you might have 100, 1,000. Will we see systems with 10,000 agents in the mix? Probably. And, that's going to be, that really is redefining, the way that we build everything.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed in few of my customers were like the whole iceberg and delta standardization on like open data formats, decoupling the engines, right? From like everything is in one lake kind of a format, and decoupling the engines, because the intelligence now, historically, like we've been in the data for way too long. Historically, what we used to do is like ETL data, model it, and make it fit for purpose for every single use case, right? So for every use case, demanded the data to be in certain formats, certain type of operations, and so on and so forth. Now, what I am seeing, and you folks can let me know if what your observations are, like kind of making, kind of agreeing to this, like standardized open format data is dumped into a lake because now the models are smart. They can process JSON, they can process XML, Parquet, whatever be it. That whole push of like transforming and all of that, cleaning and all of that is a little bit lesser, because now all of that is pushed to the use case. And zero ETL is becoming more and more spoken about, like zero ETL, like zero copy of data, which is also fundamentally changing how data engineering has been, right? So my hypothesis is like data engineering is getting a little bit stabilized because of that. Would love to see if you are also seeing a similar pattern.
Trey, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. I'm like, we could just go back and forth on these ones. But I think with a lot of this too, right? I mean, this kind of continues to come up when you think about APIs now being text-based, right? Where it's like, if the AI can just read everything, then does it matter? And it really matters just with speed, right? Like the things that you're going to get out of Iceberg, the things you're going to get out of Delta are essentially like, it's structure. And so like, that's, I think one of the things that's like kind of like a pet peeve of mine with like a lot of this kind of move towards like, just text-based everything, right? It's like, oh, like, let's just read, read in whatever language, right? But it's, it's not XML, which had, heavy structure, especially with like XL, like, what was it? Like XLS or whatever else like that. I'm like, now I'm dating myself. I can't remember my XML terminology. That's okay. But XML did a really good job of structuring everything, prior to JSON being like, well, we structure it, but it's more free form. And so I think it's interesting now where it's like, what is the right way to do these things, right? Like, I think the structure in the past hurt a lot of times because of like, the problems with, Hive, right? We always go back to Hive. We always, I always go back to Hive, right? Where it's like, well, partitioning ruined a lot of things. It also fixed a lot of things and made things good. But I think that, nowadays we're seeing a lot of like, just kind of changes in general, whether it's in Iceberg or it's in, Delta Lake or it's in, Duck Lake, any of the other, new formats that are coming out. I think a lot of the push is just to having structured data just in general. And I hope that agents can consume better structure in the future, because it is odd to kind of put everything back into a text blob and then recoerce it back into, structure again. Like whether you're using like Pydantic or if you're doing like, any kind of like other like annotation based, schemas, right? Like we're giving schemas, but we're making it difficult to kind of speak the same language. And so maybe there'll be a new format that comes out.
That's an interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Alex, what do you think?
No, totally agree with that. But I mean, the other thing I was like sort of thinking about was sort of how, yes, data engineering is changing because you're focusing like a lot less on repetitive data movement. You're still moving data because there's still lots of systems. Like even if you standardize on Iceberg or Delta or Python or Hoodie, you still got to like get the data into these things. But then it's like having all these other layers of additional or your as many different layers of transformations becomes less. Doesn't necessarily mean they don't exist, but they can become more logical, more virtual in a sense. And then this is where I think like why semantic layers are getting so much attention now, because instead of defining all these transformations by actually transforming the data, you just basically are engineering the semantics over it. And then the AI can then map the data from the semantics to those original data sets. So it becomes less having to have all these physical variations. So people are becoming more semantic engineers, if the coin a term. But yeah, so that's my 2 cents.
You folks saw today's announcement of Snowflake announcing the open semantic kind of.
I did not
the
hear
interchange
that.
initiative.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I guess I was just had good timing.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting and great insights here. In yes, when I saw the announcement just a few hours back around the open semantic interchange, which actually aims to have like a universal semantic data frame for all companies to standardize their fragmented data definitions with an open, I guess, vendor neutral approach. So that's something pretty interesting to see how that works out. But exactly what you guys are talking about. So I think we are getting to a topic where I'm kind of also wanting to learn about data readiness and trust. Wanting to learn from you guys, what practices have you all seen or observed that effectively balance automation with data trust? Because every enterprise leader that I talk to, they always want to make sure that the data quality is in place, they can trust, and the access to the data is being governed pretty well. There are pretty good guardrails there. So yeah, around the practices, I'm kind of curious to learn a little more. Alex, maybe you can go first.
Yeah. I mean, far as like what I see people using, I see people use a variety of different platforms like Tell My that help out with this. But when I think through like, do I notice any specific trends? I mean, you're still trying to catch the same types of problems. I think part of the newer challenges are the tools that you use to catch these things aren't as like before. You have like data warehouses, and a lot of data warehouses had a lot of this tooling built into them. When you're going to the Lakehouse, you're much more. There's a bigger need for like external tooling that knows how to connect to like your Lakehouse catalog, that understands the table metadata to provide you sort of the metrics you would need to kind of catch not just like errors in the data, but other types of errors that might be easier to catch by using that metadata. So that's sort of like a new thing. You're solving the same problem. It's just like technologically how you get there is slightly different. And then there's also always the aspect you hear the people talking about like data contracts. So just trying to catch not just data quality issues once you actually have the data in your lakehouse or warehouse, but trying to catch all the data problems that happen way before it ever even gets there. Through things like data contracts and whatnot. So, that's I think the more sort of newer sort of like conceptual, that sort of end to end. And I think that's like a big part of what like you guys are doing over there at Buff, right?
Yeah.
So like I'll let you speak to that.
Cool. I'm like, what a good setup. So there's like, I'm like, all right, great, wonderful. I don't even have to try. But I think with that, like, right, like, so in like the Proto Buff ecosystem, like, I'll just talk about our open source stuff. Like at Buff, we created something called Proto Validate, which literally lets you embed those data contracts directly in like your schema definitions. So it's sort of like a, you know, it's a missing tool that didn't exist before. We didn't build it directly, like we inherited it, and now we support it and maintain it for like the open source community. But we just had our 1.0 release about 3 weeks ago, which is great. And so there's a lot of like interesting things you can do with it that allow you to essentially, you know, have that kind of protection, like at the earliest point of any kind of ingestion, and not even ingestion, right? It's like edge protection, right? So you can do it at a gateway. You can do it before your data kind of like gets polluted into like the data lake itself. But once things are in the data lake, then it kind of goes back to traditional, you know, great expectations, Spark expectations, which was something we had built like at Nike, or really any kind of like, you know, hand-coded validation tools, right? Any kind of like predicate functions and things that people have been, you know, rolling for years. Like, do we know what this object should be? How then can we continue to ensure that the right objects continue to get created? And then from there, you know, I always think about these things as like an object reference, like old Pojo models and things like that. But aside from that, right, it's, you know, how does this one table transform to something else, whether it's being materialized or not? And is it doing that in a repeatable way? You know, it's kind of like that no surprises architecture. And I think, you know, that's good for any system, you know, whether it's, you know, agentic or it's just, you know, I'm like, I don't know what the opposite of agentic now is, like casual, right? It's like, you know, old school
It's
data.
non-existent, Scott. It's
Thank you for that.
yeah. I would like to chime in because this is something we can breathe. As I pointed when we started, there's a fundamental shift. Like, and both of you, Alex and Scott, pointed out that validating data as soon as it lands, as soon as it's ingested, has become very important because there's no like lineage to backtrack like the analytical world and all of that, right? But fundamentally, also, what I'm seeing is because now unstructured data has become a part of the use case, it's a first class citizen. Validating data that gets right away, the moment the PDFs are converted, the moment like that unstructured data is used as a part of the pipeline, that validation has also become critical piece. And most observability companies, DQ companies have to support this. It's almost become a table stake. For us, it was very obvious that you validate data at Lake, which Alex, you pointed out, is not as simple as a warehouse where you can push down SQLs and get it. The data can be in any format, JSON, and like you have to connect to all these open catalog systems. But the fundamental shift is also make the validation and the context of validation has to be available through an MCP, right? Because that was not how we were thinking a few years back. But now it's not just that. When an agent is going to query the data, let's say I'm doing an invoice processing and I'm making decision of what claims do I need to process. If the claims data is missing or the claims ID are missing, I'm going to exclude some of those records when I'm making those decisions. That means this context has to be available near real time at low latency, right? So that is what like we are thinking now, that yes, our customers are going to need this to make their agent story successful. So we need to get that context out as soon as data lands. We need to make sure this context is available as a part of our MCP. And so the agents are able to kind of operate. So that's a fundamental shift. And I'm almost like thinking that things like data quality need to become a headless application over a period of time, right? Like the biggest challenge was data quality so distributed. Initially, it was centralized, which nobody liked, that because the people who owned it didn't have the context. So we said, let's try to decentralize. What was the challenge with decentralization? People who have the context struggle with SQL. They struggle with using yet another tools. This is not their KPI. Data quality is not important for them. They want to sell products and stuff. So decentralization is possible today because of NLP and all. So we can do some of that stuff. But in the end, it's like a world where agents can do some of these checks, get that context out, and provide it to that whole agentic workflow that these are the records that are accessible and have the right data. And I'll close it with the whole iceberg WAP framework, right? Which is a really big step in the same direction. That Iceberg has this write, audit, publish. Am I like preaching to? I shouldn't be talking. You folks are the experts on all of this, but that is all like how do you embed trust as the data moves from in different branches in Iceberg, right? So it's fundamentally becoming a part of the orchestration already. You want to chime in anything specifically on WAP or any of this?
Oh, I mean, I love the whole like. I 100% agree that like generally like the whole direction of headlessness, not just in data quality, but just really like the whole data stack becoming very very headless. I mean, MCP is essentially enabling that, basically making it where any interface, allowing us to plug in any interface is the way we interact with all of our data tools without us like the platform creators having to decide on what the interface is. We just provide the tools, and I mean, we think chatbots are typically is like the typical interface, but theoretically you could create an interface that's just a push button that triggers the MCP, that triggers prompts out there and whatnot. Yeah, no, we're definitely walking into a world where application building is more about building functionality and less about designing a user experience because of the decoupling from that UI per se. Everyone's just gonna just hop into their favorite chat client and chat through all their applications, which is really exciting. Wait, I can't wait till I can like just plugs into like FL Studio and Adobe Photoshop, and I'm doing photo and music editing right from my favorite chat prompt, like cut from here, cut to there. Never mind, I'm just getting excited.
It is exciting, actually. Every time even I talk about this, I feel like, oh my god, it's a new world. And
yeah, I can chime in too. Like I think one of the things that I think is interesting about that too, right, is like if you think about like this, it's kind of like this like a graph of operators, right? It's you think about agent to agent protocol and like all like the new other kind of innovations that are coming out during this whole entire like this renaissance in whatever this is now, Web 4.0, et cetera, right? But with all of that right now, right, it wouldn't be problematic to say, okay, well, in the same way that we are using like npm or anything else to go and get a bunch of different like essentially like library plugins, right, to do certain things. That's essentially what's happening with like GitHub's new like MCP marketplace, or Docker Hub's new MCP marketplace. It's like what are all these things that you need to now get your job done? So if you want to go and extract metadata in a very open semantic way from a PDF, then great, there's an agent for that, right? I mean, no, there's not right now, but I'm just saying in the future there's gonna be an agent for that, right? It's like look under your seat, everyone's getting an agent, right? It's like we're gonna have something, right? And then we're gonna essentially like it really doesn't matter what you're doing, right? So it goes back to that that holy grail, which is like any kind of data can flow in to the lakehouse through some sort of transformer that was always going to be up to date, that will always land data in the correct way. And I do think that it's like when we go headless, right, when we take the humans out of the loop, it means that we don't have to screw stuff up because like we're on a time crunch, right? We got to get something out the door immediately. But then we also kind of give up everything when it becomes like that black box model where it's like, well, I hope that it's working as expected. So then bugs are going to be a lot more problematic when those bugs, are released, and essentially it's like a poison pill across a lot of systems. So then again, it goes back to security, but also it goes back to good software, engineering best practices as well, right? Absolutely. It's like is this heavily tested because like the stakes are high? Like in a lot of cases, like it might not matter for like PDFs as much, but it does, right? If it's claims data or if it's insurance data, anything else like that, that matters for anybody who is like the end user of that. On either side of the equation.
Yeah, and we haven't even touched the PII data and all of that. It does open a lot of can of worms, but I think the optimist in us are still excited about what technology can do, and as long as we have the right guardrails, the right context, and we can definitely enable that path.
I love it. I can listen to you guys like all day and learn so much about the data architecture, the agentic AI iceberg, obviously. Shifting gears a little bit here in terms of since we are on this topic of AI and the roadmap looks interesting. But when we talk to enterprises, production is what they care about, and how do you kind of obviously create that AI roadmap from pilot to production is very important. So quick question all of you here, what do you see as the most important success factors for making agentic workflows succeed at scale in the enterprise? And are there any certain frameworks or patterns that kind of makes the team successful? Any thoughts around that? Mona, maybe you can go first this time.
Wow. Okay. So for me, vast majorly, right, like the consumer use cases are picking up faster. We all know that because
Mm-hmm.
low hanging, the models are trained. I even recollect, which stuck really in my head, a CIO saying that I'm focusing. I have a lot of AI use cases in production, but none of them touch proprietary data, right? So, but that's where the meat of use cases is. We all know that there's so much untapped value in the proprietary data. This is the data that's in PDF and on. And I think we are still scratching the surface there, and for the right reason. And honestly, I'm a big favor of doing it the right way, because exactly the point these folks have been calling out: lineage, like metadata, role-based access. How do we make sure the agent have the right access and they are not doing something they shouldn't be doing? I
Right.
do feel, though, that some of this is really coming together very well with this whole concept of context. And this context is going to include a lot of these things. So, what I'm seeing in the people who have actually got this proprietary data is that a little bit of tweak in their architecture, making sure the validation, the context, the security, the governance is in place, and then onboarding those use cases slowly but surely, but getting the foundation right is the first step, right? Jumping at the use case without getting your house in shape is the most riskiest thing here, and that's these many percentage are failing. I mean, let's look at the win stories. There are win stories, and these win stories are mostly coming from people who are doing the foundational things right. So that's what I'm seeing in our customers. A lot of them, the ones that are like strategic, are getting the foundation in place, are making sure they have the right lineage, they have the right validation, they have the right security in place.
Love it. Scott?
Yeah. So I think with a lot of this stuff too, right? Like it's getting, I like the baby steps approach, Mona, that you were talking about as well, right? It's like get one thing working well, and then move on and make another thing work well and make another thing work well as well. Because I think it's interesting because you'll learn a lot of different patterns, right? Like for example, I was using LangGraph to try and communicate with like fast MCP. But prior to like agent to agent, and it was interesting. Like you go from like LangGraph to OpenAI internally, then to FastMCP. So there's like 3 levels of like transformation, and what you finally get back as like your response from like the MCP server ends up not actually having structure, so you have to parse it again. And so kind of like it's interesting when I was talking a little bit before about how it's like it's odd that we're going from like highly structured systems to essentially text only, and then like trying to coerce it back into like some sort of structured model like internally within like the MCP program or within like your LangGraph application. I think it like that's going to get easier too, and it's going to make a lot of these like kind of like like words are hard, right? It's like with a lot of this, there's getting to that first production release is difficult because there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of back and forth transformations, and there's a lot of lessons learned and scar tissue, and like it's like this was so hard, but now we have a good pattern to move forward with this, versus essentially trying to fan out to too many use cases at the same time where everyone's going to get stuck solving those same problems again. It's like any like new language or framework you use, right? It's like what's a good use case. Friends of mine will go through and like create Tetris in any programming language they learn, or people will create Sudoku, things like that, right? It's what do you know?
Yep.
And once you have the system in place, you can kind of go from there, or you can just use like Claude or Codex to help you along your way as well. How do the systems that use this every day build their own systems? So 2 paths.
Yeah.
One you learn more, and one you learn potentially what a good model will look like for you in the future.
Fantastic. Alex, what do you think? What are you hearing and what are you seeing?
Got it. I mean, if I were to break down sort of like how I would prioritize sort of like how to enable your AI workflows, I would actually just to kind of quickly think of a quick framework. I would think of it as 3 Ps: prep, performance, people. In a sense, like prep would be sort of the whole sort of data quality, data observability, data semantics, and again, these are all things that platforms like Telemi and Buff are really designed to kind of help address that piece. But then once you have good data that the AI can give you good responses on, it still needs to perform, because no one wants to be really waiting for these long prompts. Then you're going to still reduce sort of the how much people are going to use it if they're waiting minutes for a prompt to respond. So you want that data to kind of come back. The problem is the agentic AI is going to be throwing all sorts of queries that it's going to be harder for you to predict what those queries are going to be. So the manual ways of tuning performance become harder to be consistent when you have the sort of when what's coming at your what SQL is coming at you is more dynamic than ever. And this is where I'm sort of excited in a lot of sort of like these autonomous performance features. I know that's one thing that we're working on quite a bit at Dremio, but also just like a lot of other people are creating sort of features that help autonomously sort of improve performance. And I think so that solves that second piece. And then the third piece, people, is like the culture around using the AI. Like even once you have good performant answers, there's still going to, and even though you can, with MCP, you can kind of build in template prompts, there's still going to be a level of education for the human to be able to kind of still, even though we're taking more and more off of them, there's still a level of them learning how to use the tools to get the best response possible. And I mean, that's oftentimes the difference between those who have had increases in productivity from AI versus the opposite. It's more like, hey, are the people using the tool correctly, or using it? Do they know how to use the tool in a way that actually makes them more productive? Versus, like that story where like I think like a lawyer submitted like a dossier that was AI generated and with like all sorts of inconsistent, citing papers that didn't exist and all sorts of things because they didn't double check it and didn't know sort of understand the tool that they were using. So 3 Ps: prep, performance, people.
Awesome.
Very well said, actually. I'm going to take that one. Like, it's pretty interesting. I was recently teaching my daughter Java. Yes, it's still taught and it's still relevant. And I was telling her, you should think how a compiler works, and then you'll not make mistakes, and then you will know how loops and all that. In AI world, I think we have to change that to, we should think how an AI is going to react and what is happening a little bit. If not, it's not a full black box either way. So it might really help us get there faster. And one observation I'll add here with as a vendor, right?
Sure.
The CISOs are getting super active right now, which is a good thing for all of us. Like we keep getting these new questions in an AI questionnaires. Like every time they're looking at vendors, now we have more and more scrutiny on what models you use, how the data is being processed, how it's pushed, deployed. So all of these are good things. I look at them as guardrails that will help us scale and build processes around adoption. So all good signs. I don't see it as objection. I see it as room for growth and making sure that we have the right kind of setups around us.
I was taking down some notes from the conversation. It's interesting. I was thinking back more to this, Alex, when you were talking about essentially like non-deterministic results from a model. And I think it's interesting because I think when you think about an API and you think about a set of essentially static data, I'm going to go, say I'm going to ask for a user profile. It's not going to change unless I'm going to change my address or something else. It's going to be infrequent changes. But it's interesting when you can get back, semantically valid SQL that will perform well or not, and that might change from time to time as well. It's interesting. Like, I guess I'm going to pose this question back to the whole group. How do you see essentially the kind of the evolution of like deterministic model results coming for things like, semantic SQL, like ANSI SQL, anything else like that, like in the future? Like, does that go back to compilers as well?
Well, I mean, the way, because I mean that is an issue for like, so if you're like here at Dremio, like we're a SQL query engine, any SQL query engine has to deal with that issue when they create their MCP server. Like how is the model going to deterministic come up with the right SQL more of the time? So a lot of that burden right now is like oftentimes on the semantic layer. So basically, we're passing down like schema information, wiki information. If it's a SQL view, sort of it's lineage views. So fortunately, like we've had a lot of that stuff built in there, but the thing is that there's always more that you need to do because and then there's all these external like semantic layers. When you think of companies like Cube and AtScale and whatnot that also provide like their own layer of semantics. So part that I think helps make it more deterministic. I feel like the better the semantics are, the more you're going to get the same SQL over and over again because it's going to reason to the same place. I mean, not it may add one column or subtract one column depending on sort of the exact prompt, but I feel the semantic layer is what helps make the output more deterministic versus the SQL compiler, because we're just going to receive the SQL and just execute it, but it's up to the LLM to kind of think that through, in the way the semantic layer ends up becoming the engine that does that.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting as well. Is there something you wanted to say as well? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Scott, the question is absolutely something that I've put a lot of thought on, and not in the context of SQL or even the Java thing is new for me, right? Like teaching. And that's where I've started thinking it's so predictable. Like if you understand how the compiler works, you will be able to master that. But that's not how we could operate in AI. And that comes back to the mental model shift that we are all going through, right? The hardest part, right? That we are not used to black boxes. So the way in the data world I saw is like it's use case specific. Some use case you're okay to be a little bit of a black box, and that goes back to you dump the raw data. You need data real time. Sometimes you have an error kind of a threshold that I can deal with a little bit of inaccurate data and all of that. In certain use cases, that's not possible at all, and that's where I feel the context and the semantics and the validation context, all of that will become so crucial. That if I'm using this data, this came from CRM system, and I can trace it back where it came from, even if the outcome of model is so and so, the end human that's going to look at whatever the output is, if wants to go back and trace it for those use cases, should have the context available. So that's the only in middle ground that I have come to personally, like come to peace with. So yeah, but it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, Scott.
I think that tracing is actually like a really interesting part of all of this as well. So being able to go back through like the reasoning tree, whatever you want to call it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it feels like a Dr. Seussism, but it's like the reasoning tree. I'd read that, right? But I think it's interesting because I back at like Data Summit or Data AI Summit back in like whatever June, I was showing like it's like what can you do with like a smaller kind of context window, and it's interesting how quickly you run out of tokens when you have a ton of columns per row.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's the second you run out of memory, it's like, well, that's your table, right? And it's like, well, you made it through 20 of the 100 columns. And I think it's kind of interesting too, right? Where because we're talked a little bit about kind of context before, and like how like context windows are opening up a lot as well. And I think that's going to help, I think, resolve a lot of these issues that we're running into right now, where it's like almost like a partial memory issue, right? Where it's like, are we always hitting this kind of non-deterministic result because, we aren't actually giving it the same number of tokens in the same way. And anyways, I don't know if it was tangential, but this conversation made me kind of think back on that a little bit as well, where it's, are we going to create the same number of columns every time? Are we going to create the same output? Or, is that something where it's like we're kind of giving like, hints to a tool as we're, it's like, say it's a table and you're like, hint, I have 100 columns, like, please like, allocate memory or, forget prior window information to kind of reduce the window size prior to trying to answer this, result. Otherwise, send me back like an error, right? Like a lot of our other systems, you get like a proxy, gateway exception, something else like that. If a system's, not working correctly, we might get a 400 if things are, invalid. But we don't necessarily have that yet either for like, agentic tools. It's like, well, we have either a correct response or we tried our best and it broke. And so I think it's interesting to see where kind of those things go to. Over the months, I guess, months or days to come, right before the next framework comes out.
So. 100%.
Something
Tonight.
to definitely think
or
of.
Tonight.
Yeah.
You blink and something is coming up. So yeah.
That's awesome. I think that was too deep, Scott, but very good and very insightful. So thanks for bringing that up. Also thinking a little bit about the future, right? And the bold predictions. I'm kind of curious to know a little bit about that. We have looked at where we are today and what it takes to succeed. Definitely. Let's end by maybe looking at what's ahead. So curious to learn the bold predictions about the future. This is like my favorite question because I get to hear a little bit about the future and what y'all are thinking and because you all have so much experience in this space, it kind of helps. So what's one idea you once thought was unrealistic but now feels possible in the light of the shifts we have seen over the last few years? And how do you see the future? Who wants to go first? I'll let you all decide.
I'll talk about one thing. I mean, one thing that's kind of just crossing my mind as we have this conversation is like going back to the whole context window thing. Is that one thing is like the context window is the big right now the big constraint, but it's not just the constraint of sort of like, hey, what data can I provide or whatnot, but it's also the constraint of the constraints. Like you can only provide as much semantic information as that window can hold, which means as far as like as you're kind of like saying with the deterministic stuff. But I mean, eventually that may not be the issue. Eventually, you'll have context windows that are bigger than we would ever need, and then the problem kind of switches where basically now it's like, how do we use that context window efficiently? Not because there's a limit, but one for resource like the cost of all this stuff, but also just like it'll come down, I guess, to performance. So like thinking through like, where will you see new caching layers within this whole pipeline? That's the part that's sort of kind of, I think, going to keep me up tonight. But like not because you need them per se once you have those context windows that big, but because you'll want to optimize the usage of those context windows, because now it becomes how to use, now that the tool is fully usable, how do I use it efficiently becomes the next phase.
Yeah, it's like abundance of anything, right? Then you have to optimize that what is most relevant, and like caching and all of those things that maybe new breed of new categories of startups here. Like, how do you optimize your context?
So true.
Relevance on relevance, whatever that may be called.
I think that's an interesting thing too, because that just reminds me of like checkpointing a little bit. So it's like, it's all these, this whole entire series of things happened. Let's bundle it up over here and ignore all this other garbage. We can reconstruct it from here. It's like, how do we continue to take, a ton of information into like these kind of like smaller components, so we can essentially kind of map, it's on like the theme of what we were doing versus like the explicit steps that we had to take before as well. But in terms of like the things, I'm just going to switch gears to the things that I didn't think were possible, right? Like if you asked me like 3 years ago whether or not pretty much most engineering workflows would be kind of cannibalized by like not even just like agentic software in general, but just like by foundational models, I think that's something I would have been, I would have called kind of BS like a couple of years back. I think I was a very big AI skeptic when it's like, oh, here's all these things that are going to be amazing, and it's like, cool, but all this other stuff works well, and this rule based and all of this stuff. It's like, well, throw the rules away. It's going to create its own rules. Like, but it's interesting to kind of watch things happening with like Quencoder and like a lot of these other kind of like free foundational models that are coming out that are, a pretty great, engineer. But then also seeing like people's workflows like online who have really gotten this down to like, the art and science now of, how do you literally code through prompts generally? Like, I don't want to be like, oh, vibe coding, right? But like, how do you make vibe coding a realistic thing? And I would not have seen that coming, I guess, right? Like if you'd asked me years ago, it would have been like that. Yeah, it's like 20 years away, 30 years away. I'd be retired by then, right? But here it is. So
Mona, what do you think?
I'm exactly like Scott. I thought everything that I'm using today, I thought was an eccentric idea a couple of years back. Like, yes, how can the vacation planning be done by an AI? And like for my family, what is it? And here we are, like, it is such an integrated part of how we do marketing, how do we do sales, how do we do our engineering work, how do we do our legal and operations at Telma. Everything is now possible today, which was the biggest for me personally, from denial to like embracing to being excited. Going back to data infrastructure, the short-term bold predictions were like unstructured data, how efficiently we're able to use unstructured data. I didn't think about that. The zero copy becoming such a big norm now is something that is short-term. The bold prediction for me is this whole thing about for Telmai, that I strongly believe in that headless DQ application where there is no need for humans. And I'll tell you why. First, nobody likes DQ. Like you folks know this. Everybody says we should do this, everybody. But sometimes I feel like the business owners don't, but they all know the importance of it. So it's a perfect candidate for, like, nobody's excited, wakes up in the morning and I want to do. So this is a perfect candidate for that. But then it comes down to, how do I trust this? But I do feel that if the models are trained properly, there could be better prediction, validated data, context, and all of that. The outcome could be much more reliable than human, who could still have a bias, still has emotions, and still can do mistakes. So I think over a period of time, we could definitely get to a stage, specifically for the space that I am in, where there would be an autonomous DQ. That's the direction Telma is headed in, definitely. So I believe in that, and I'm predicting that would be definitely the future that I foresee.
Love
It's a
it.
wonderful future. Yeah. Alex, do you have a prediction?
Awesome.
I mean, what other predictions would I have? I mean, aside from like the whole like the caching piece, I don't have any on the top of my mind. I know I'll think of like
anything on SQL. SQL is going to, like, some bold statement. SQL is going to not be there. Where
I still think SQL is going to be very important. How much humans will write SQL may change. I mean, that's definitely a big part of a lot of the things that are coming down the pipeline here at Dremio. We're really trying to. I mean, you know, you hear everyone's kind of like doing the agentic AI thing, but I do think there is a unique avenue for how do you enable that AI, and I'm seeing a lot of that with what our engineers are doing. So you can still, you know, write SQL possible, but again, when you combine a semantic layer that's intertwined with the engine, it just provides it some context. It's pretty interesting and enables a lot less the end user to be able to need to SQL a lot less, but it also becomes incumbent on like the underlying engines like SQL optimizations or of that SQL to be much more important, because the AI might throw out some not so great SQL, so it's on the engine to kind of sit there and, you know, reconstruct that SQL into a much better executable engine. So it just means there's a bigger burden on engineers to do great engineering work. But once you do that great engineering work, being able to provide it to people in a way that's actually usable, that they can adopt very quickly, is going to be easier than ever.
Yeah.
So that would be sort of my prediction on the SQL side. But I mean, I think you can adapt that prediction to pretty much anything. At the end of the day, like engineers can now really just do amazing work and get it. Because always part of the burden was just people learning how to use the things they built. Now it's just like you just need to express yourself, which also means the necessary for people to be able to communicate much better is going to be a much higher value. Which, now to get really pie in the sky, if people communicate better, that hopefully should mean less conflict in the world over time, which is also a very beautiful thing.
Wow.
Nice one. Scott?
I think I'd kind of touched on this like earlier, and it's more of like, I think my prediction for the future is that like a lot of like MCP becomes a lot more kind of like, you know, think about serializable binary like protocols, like not just because they work at Buff, but like if I think about being able to, you know, send, like these are not the same words at all. If I think about sending like a payload back and forth between like MCP servers or across many agents, I want to do that in a way that, you know, is, you know, size optimized, right? Like I want to think about like, you know, reducing like the bandwidth overhead, like for all of that. And I think that we're not going to be sending as much text back and forth in the future, but also like it's interesting too, right? If you think about all the unstructured data, a lot of that's like binary encoded anyways, right? It's like octet streams for like audio and video. And so if you're having to convert your video to like base 64 encoded like chunks, that's also a huge overhead. I think it was like the statistics like 33% overhead for all of that, on top of the size of the file itself. And so it's like, well, that's a ton of information, especially if we think about like systems like Midjourney, which are continuously just literally like, I'm like, there's no other way. It's like, it's dreaming all day long, right? And there's so much amazing content that's coming out of that, but it's like, what if that was encoded differently? Like, you know, could we be doing this stuff a little bit easier? And I think that that's going to happen. And then also kind of just better support for like actual streaming too, right? Like we have, streaming protocol like for MCP, but how realistic was that, to be able to, think about that as in terms of something like a Kafka, right? Where, if I think about streaming memory or context windows or being able to, share state and then be able to fork off agents from like the same point in time, like there's, I think, interesting things that will come next, like in terms of like the way that we're using memory and like our agentic systems. And so I'm very excited about that because I don't want to have to write it, and I don't have the time to really write it anyways. And I'm not that good at being able to write that because I understand enough to use it, but not to like write the, the underwiring of everything else. So I'm really hoping that whoever's watching, somebody will come out and be like, that sounds like a great idea. Let's, open source it tomorrow, right? But, we'll see how those things go.
At least
Love it.
2 or 3 startup ideas right in this episode.
Yeah.
That's the pace at which AI is operating.
Yeah, I can't wait. In first of all, Scott, Alex, Mona, such a pleasure having you all on the show. Before we get off, one last question for you guys is, if people want to reach out to you, learn more about what's happening at Buff, Dremio, Telmy, where can they do that as well? Mona, where can they find you? Where can they learn more about Telmy?
Easiest to reach me on LinkedIn, Mona Rakibe. And Telmy is very easy to find, TELM.ai. And you can read about Telmy and lots of fun stuff happening at Telmy. So stay tuned.
Fantastic.
Scott?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the primary. I'm on X as well as my old company was called Newfront. It's like an old consulting company. So I'm still Newfront over there. Nice. And you can find Buff at just buff.build.
Cool. Hey, everybody. So basically, just to follow me or in Dremio, go to dremio.com to learn about Dremio. Go to alexmerced.com to find all my socials and all the blogs and all that fun stuff. But also follow us both on LinkedIn. So follow Dremio on LinkedIn, follow myself on LinkedIn. You'll get ready for a lot of animated posts if you follow me on LinkedIn. And third, I also run this Data Lakehouse community, datalakehoushub.com. It's just a fun place to kind of read blogs about the Data Lakehouse and join a Slack community where you can talk to others about the Data Lakehouse for those who are interested. But yeah, that's where you can find me. Just dremio.com, alexmerced.com, datalakehoushub.com. See you all later.
Awesome. This is great. Thank you, Mona, Alex, Scott. Today, I really had great, clear takeaways. Obviously made data trustworthy, more context first class, and design guardrails so agents can act with confidence. That is what I hear. And I think for those who are watching us, can follow our guests on LinkedIn, other social platform. Until next time, stay tuned, and we'll keep discussing. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, Ravit, for doing this when you just had a long flight. So you're always like, you're an agent that's always on. So thank you, folks. This was
always love chatting. Thank you. Thank you.